Yeah, so we're really thrilled that you all come back and join us for this conversation. If you participated in yesterday's session and today's sessions, I think that you'll find that there was just a lot of really great information sharing, a lot of great ideas. And so we wanted to keep the dialogue going. And so the purpose of the Fire Circle is really to kind of hear from participants. Now I've heard a lot from speakers. Now let's just, open the floor a little bit more to kind of, hearing more about innovative approaches that haven't been discussed yet. And particularly in the context of changing fire regimes, also successful collaborations, cross, organizational partnerships. And then of course, the organizers of this group or these multiple sessions will do our best to glean what we have, and then we may even be able to assemble this into something that can be useful for future dialogues. Either at another meeting or funding frameworks, just however we think, we could really draw upon this great information. So yes, thank you, Molly. There's the purpose. And moving forward, we thought what we do now is just kind of do a quick recap of some of the things that we discussed already, just to kind of set the stage for our dialogues today. Go ahead, Molly.
Yeah, so this is the culmination of 2 days of session where we heard several talks. We had 2 panel discussions, one from sort of leaders who are in science funding organizations, another panel of practitioners. And this was just a, kind of a quick recap, at least of what I heard were some highlights. It's by no means, comprehensive, but we kind of started out looking at a national perspective of the issue, the challenge that we're faced with, and what different organizations are doing to address it. And I think in that, talks from the CASC and USGS and the climate hubs and JFSP, we heard of several, I think, examples of really innovative collaborations and partnerships where managers and scientists are working together to really think creatively about how to tackle this issue of changing fire regimes. We heard from Adam and Rachel Lohman getting more specific about modeling, and heard about the importance of, I think from multiple speakers, heard about the importance of having high quality data that's accessible and able to kind of do some of this modeling, from whether it be simple modeling to more complex models. But I think there was also what I heard, an acknowledgement that it's not that these models will provide an answer or kind of a perfect prediction of what's going to happen in the future, but it sort of provides a structure by which we can start the conversation and really help us think about what could happen and help us think outside of the box a little bit in terms of management solutions. And I think I heard Rachel say think not only just outside the box but beyond the box to what could happen in the future and how we might have to address it. We heard a lot about the importance of really embracing Indigenous knowledge and perspectives in our management approaches because Indigenous cultures have been, managing the resources and dealing with changing climatic condition for a long time. So that knowledge is really critical to incorporate in our own sort of Western land management practices. And then I think we also heard a lot from managers and practitioners about, really approaching this issue with a lot of humility. There's a recognition that there's going to be a need to do a lot of experimentation, and that means we could be wrong. We could fail, we don't always have the right answers, and we have to acknowledge that and be humble about that. But trying new things is going to be most likely to be acceptable if we really include diverse perspectives and not make decisions in a vacuum, but really include lots of different collaborators. And there's a recognition that that takes a great amount of time to build relationships, build trust. It takes perhaps some skills in communication and really trying to understand different perspectives and incorporate them. So we heard a lot about that as well, how important that framework is in this new realm we're dealing with. So with that, you want to kick off our discussion, Carolyn?
Yeah, so we just wanted to open it before. We thought we would, before going into breakouts where we would focus a little bit more on regional sort of perspectives, we just wanted to hear from this group a little bit of feedback on kind of, you know, those things that each of you got from it or want to add. And of course, Jonathan just put a note in the chat. And Jonathan, why don't you go ahead and just you know, elaborate or just you know, tell us what you were thinking, which motivated that particular comment.
Yeah, this is something that's been coming up a lot. We've seen some new policies coming up about traditional knowledge, and there's a lot of direction about incorporating traditional knowledge into forest planning and fire management, things like that. And I think Amy Cardinal Christensen did a good job of enforcing the point that I'm concerned about, that there's a lot of this emphasis about kind of taking knowledge and then putting it in our Western systems. And that's not really what we need to be doing. We need to be supporting the indigenous communities as part of our whole worldview. And then it's not a Western system anymore. We've come up with a new adaptive approach to that considers, you know, all of our concerns. And this really matters, I think, when it gets to the points about how do we make sure that there are resources going to these communities to do work, and that we're diversifying our workforces to reflect the communities where these challenges are present. And so I was in the fire circle previously with some of the indigenous groups, and we had a number of discussions about kind of specific actions that would be helpful. And part of it is to try to just embed indigenous priorities in these larger landscape planning efforts in terms of identifying areas that are really important for getting cultural burning back in. And then how do you manage our fire systems, especially, you know, the ridge line, control line areas, in ways that are more in tune with traditional values and protecting resources. And then a last point was about the idea of investing in more crews that are kind of local, that are focused on using intentional fire, rather than just having folks that are primarily, you know, assigned to go to wildfires anywhere around the country. But how do you develop that local capacity of people that really know fires well and can apply that for prescribed burning, and they're not going to get called off to Southern California during the prescribed fire season, because that's when the fires are happening. And then that could be a much better opportunity for Native folks in Native communities to have experience and good jobs and work in these areas.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, that's really kind of some, you know, very tangible types of ideas that, you know, as we move forward in our own spaces and our own places, promoting that sort of thing in any way, shape, or form that we can. Other comments related to that or other things that came up? Jeremy, do you want to go ahead and just speak up?
Well, I saw Sarah agreeing with Jonathan, and I think both Sarah and I could contribute here a little bit from different perspectives. But I think in Arctic boreal systems, you know, Alaska, Canada, to a lesser degree, in like Fennoscandia, I think we see an emphasis on addressing future fire with multiple knowledges. It isn't taking one and putting it in another framework or vice versa. It's instead that the future defies all the frameworks that we have from the past, except that we know variability occurs and that change occurs. And so incorporating both those approaches into each other doesn't really work. It's instead approaching the future problem with all those knowledges. And to the extent even that there are different indigenous knowledges even within that ecosystem, to the extent we can call it one in this region. So it's tougher than just taking what's known from one and adding it to our current management paradigm.
Yeah, really, really good point. And Sarah, did you want to add to that?
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I just want to underscore everything that Jonathan said, especially from the workforce development side, and really honoring what the tribes and communities want, sort of putting their perspectives at the center, their needs, so that management can partner sort of on an equal footing rather than have an extractive kind of perspective. So thanks, Jonathan, for bringing that up.
Great. Other ideas related to how we work, authentically with tribes and their knowledge and further support those approaches?
I have a comment. I think
I just have a
Go ahead.
comment, or actually a question. You know, I work with the Diversity, Inclusion, Equity Committee for this AFI group, and I think this came up in our emails, but the word stakeholder is kind of, we use it a lot, but it also at times is not the best word choice. Oh, sorry, Sarah, I just saw your hand up. I'm just curious if folks, I try to use the word partners, I try to avoid stakeholder, but I'm wondering if other people have good language that's inclusive to kind of get away from the old like outreach to stakeholders mentality.
Really good point, Garrett. Go ahead, Sarah, and then we'll have Hugh after that.
Yeah, thanks. I agree that partner is a good term. I just also wanted to suggest in terms of things that we could do. There's a lot we can do to educate ourselves in terms of reading and getting up to speed with the management plans or the economic development plans or the tribal resource management plans with the tribes that are in our regions or that we want to work with. So we can do a lot of our own homework and not rely on those people, the tribes or the tribal people, to educate us. I think if we do that homework ahead of time and come in showing them that we've done that homework, it will go a long way in building the trust and respect to let them know, hey, we know how to find the documents. We understand all the challenges that in communities is way beyond just fire. All the challenges that they face are beyond just fire, and being able to show an understanding and appreciation for how fire connects with all the other challenges they face, I think would go a long way.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. Hugh, and then Kevin.
those are great points. I just wanted to refer a little bit to sort of the scaling up issues that you run into with a lot of just the scales of the tribal burning, cultural burning, fire use, and those scales. You're not going to see those at the level of the kind of differences that we need to make. And so I think one of the real big things we need to work with tribal groups, small landholders, rural populations of all kinds is how do you turn, that kind of very private, local, personal fire use into something that's actually going to save the world. And, a good place to start is where they've actually done this. And I think Northeastern Australia is probably the best example I know of worldwide where, this is 20, 30 years worth of work that went into this. But at this point, there are entire watersheds and major portions of giant national parks the size of small American states where they've turned the whole fire management apparatus over to Aboriginal groups. And the incredible thing is to me, forgive me, as a white person, mind you, is the way in which that cultural use of fire and now on an expanding scale and across large landscapes now is linked to a Western idea of science, so that they're actually monitoring this stuff in Australia, and there's enough data now to suggest that this stuff is actually working really, really. I find it amazing and a really neat melding of cultures and different ways of looking at how fire gets used and how it's adjudicated. And the other thing is that, a lot of the rest of the world has seen this, like Botswana recently, started adapting similar processes in the way that they manage fire on landscapes. So we've talked in California about arranging some level of cultural interchange between leading tribal fire users in California and Aborigines in Northeastern Australia to get a feeling for exactly how this all worked out. And the cool thing in California is the state wildfire action plan is loaded with cash to do this kind of thing. And indeed, I just found out the other day, John, I don't know if you know about this, but there's a couple $100 million in that action plan that are sitting in accounts. And right now there's no plan for what to do with them. Cal Fire, I think, would just as soon hand the money to someone and say, woo, success, we spent 200 million. Whereas we all know that that doesn't equal success. So I think a lot of us need to do some thinking about what actually happens with some of that money. Anyway, just some random general thoughts.
Great. Kevin.
Now, Hugh sort of blown my mind. It's, the scaling of cultural fires is really important. And Paul asked a question yesterday about, do we know what we want out of this, this influx of infrastructure funding? And in a lot of ways, I feel like cultural burning, whether it's tribal burning, in Australia or California, anywhere, it has an advantage, just a theoretical advantage of people being part of the ecosystem. And maybe that's one of the things, Hugh, that scales the best is just, we spent a century trying to take people out of, ecosystems, defining natural as anything not influenced by the touch of a human hand. And that, I think, conceptually is going to be really important for adaptation and scaling it, across a variety of ecosystems. And I know it seems maybe semantic, but I feel like it's a really important advantage of cultural burning regimes is that instantly it's for an objective that becomes measurable, that becomes trackable, and then at least in terms of scaling, it does seem like take the Southeast. I know it's not tribal burning, but it's it's scaled, but it's 1,000 different people setting 1,000 different fires on 100 different days, and it does tend to create interesting outcomes and opportunities to learn.
Yeah, and I think building on that idea, just the multiple objectives that cultural burning also sort of brings, there was someone said somewhere that, it's not just about ecological context, it's about the people context. And with indigenous knowledge, that everything, they're connected in ways that tribal health equals environmental health equals fire equals. So, and at any rate, it is just a whole nother approach of looking at fire, and that could be incorporated, I think, more learning from Australia, learning from other places to scale. Jonathan, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. In responding to Hugh's comment about the scale issue, I've been thinking a lot about that. And I think one of the frameworks that's really going to be important going forward is this PODS planning framework and just fire use planning in general. And there's a bunch of money also in the infrastructure bill to support that, which specifically mentions native villages. And so the opportunities are there. I'm very concerned that with this big flush of money, we don't have a good scheme for putting things into action. But I would say one of the ideas that I think we're really trying to move out on is you've got these areas of tribal importance around meadows, oak groves, all sorts of things like that where people want to burn. So how do we make sure that there's room for those cultural practitioners to do that work, and they're not going to have a lot of resistance or interference? But then the next piece out from that, I think, is working on these control line areas, the ridge line features, the old trails that people traditionally managed using fire for long periods, because that's where you can kind of get that scale opportunity to talk about how we're going to manage big prescribed burns, how we're going to manage wildfires. And tribes that we've talked to have a lot of interest and ideas about how to manage those systems, so that you're not just constantly bringing your dozers up the same lines every few years to fight the next fire and wiping out the park sites and medicinal plants. And I think that's, to me, where we've got some really interesting opportunities, especially in California.
Yeah, no, this is great. And I wonder if we could kind of take some of this sort of thinking and attempt to think about it in the context of our regions. And then when we come back after our breakouts, we'll just give that a shot for about 20 to 30 minutes, depending on how the conversation is going there. We're not trying to really force or contrive here, but at the same time, to see if we can dig a little bit deeper within the context of our own regions, and then come back and make sure that we have enough time to kind of to share that out with the broader group. Are folks still comfortable with that? Or if we're not going to lose folks if we go ahead and do some regional breaking out. All right. So I'm going to pass it to Molly.
Okay,
Or whom? Who was that?
yeah, no, that's fine. Or do you want to
Yeah.
set this stage really quick?
Yeah, so what we had discussed was to, again, kind of think about our own regions in the context of what's been successful in terms of adaptation approaches to changing fire regimes. Also thinking about, these changing environmental conditions, how are we addressing that in terms of our approaches to wildland fire management, and also this last question related to ecosystem change and the trajectory of carbon emissions and these other sort of factors that increasingly need to be taken into consideration. What's happening in your region related to that. So, not that we have to dwell on any one of these, but these were some of the kind of themes that we thought would also kind of help stimulate an interesting conversation in the context of our regions. Yeah, Molly, do you want to talk about the logistics then?
Yeah, so we, again, we have these questions that we kind of posed in the context of what Carolyn just described. Again, they're meant to help facilitate discussion, but obviously if the discussion is free flowing, that's fine. It's not that these all have to be addressed specifically. But what we thought we would do is, and Carolyn's alluded to this, is sort of have different breakout sessions that are focused on different geographies, because I think one of the things we heard throughout these past couple of days is just how different the issue is in different parts of the country. When you think about the juxtaposition of Alaska and the Southeast, the culture and the ecology is very different, and how changing fire regimes are sort of manifesting themselves is very different. So, and then we have a facilitator and a note taker assigned for each room. So we'll try to break out for about, I think about 20 to 30 minutes. We'll see how it goes. And you'll just self-select a breakout group based on, either the region that you're working in, or one that that you maybe you want to learn about, or whatever that might be. If any one group is sort of small, or the discussion is not really free flowing, I think we can have the flexibility to sort of move around. But this is how it will, we've breaking it out. So group 1 will focus on the Southwest. Group 2 is Alaska. 3 is the Southeast, and 4 is California. So at this point, I think if we can, on the questions that we posted, I just put them in the chat. So for any of you who are leading a breakout group, if you could go ahead and copy those and make sure that they're available in the chat when you go into a breakout room.
I'm not seeing those on the chat, or am I just not?
Yeah, I don't see them in the chat either.
Is it only for?
There we go.
Oh, there they are.
Oh, good. Oh, it just took a moment. Okay. Cool.
Okay, so
Are
you're ready
you-
for me to open the rooms up, Molly?
Well, real quick, Jeremy had a quick question.
No. I was speculating on why it hadn't shown up, but we got it.
Okay, we're good then.
Okay.
Annie, take it away.
Okay, so do you see anything yet? Okay, good.
Hi, I don't see any. Oh, wait, do I need to go to the breakout room maybe?
Yeah. So you'll just self-select one and then you'll pop in.
How do I join? I don't see any pop-up window. I can
It
go to.
doesn't, nothing popped up. Okay, I'm gonna assign you to Alaska. Would that be right?
Yeah, great, thanks.
Okay. There you go.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Hey, Molly. Are you guys ready for me to send a message to say the groups are closing?
I think so, yeah. If you could send me the, is there a call-in number? My internet's pretty unstable.
Oh, I don't know the answer to that right this second, but let me go look in the Zoom settings. Okay, let me send this message out. So are you
Okay.
gonna shut now?
Yeah, I think our group finished.
Yeah, I accidentally pushed the leave meeting instead of the
Okay.
leave group, but I connected again through the link. I don't know where Bob went to.
Okay. So I'm sending this now, and I think it gives them like a 60-second warning or something. Let me see.
I mean, it's a good sign. It means everyone's deep in conversation.
Yes. Okay, and let me go see about this call-in number. All right, Molly, I'm gonna email you the full invitation.
Okay, great, thanks.
Okay.
All right, does it look like we're all back? We had Paul for a bit. He had to take off. Are we missing anyone else? All right. Well, I just want to thank everybody for sticking around. Hope you had a fruitful discussion, productive and fun discussion in your breakouts. I think right now what we'd like to do is just kind of go around to each of the groups and kind of hear, give a little insight as to what really captured your attention and the conversation in your group. So let's start with the group 1. I think that was Southwest.
Yes. And Molly was on there too. So Molly, feel free to pipe in since you took the notes. We ended up only having a few of us and we ended up in a completely different direction, which was a great direction. And I think it is relevant in terms of determining some of the climate adaptation strategies that we need to move forward. And the problem basically of that 2 to 5 year academic graduate cycle was brought up. And so we sort of came up with some potential ideas to address that. And we think, funding entities could help address that. JFSP might be able to help address that. Dana Skelly was in our group. She ended up coming on the Southwest one. It's something that academics sort of fight, and it can be overcome. I mean, we can plan long term. We can still fit our little students into their little niches throughout. So anyway, we came up with some ideas to potentially address that. Molly, did you have anything else to add? You have notes if you took any notes.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'll try. My internet's been a little bit unstable. But we, sort of talked about, I think with all of these things, it just seems like there's a common thread that we need long-term studies, and it's hard within both academia and in federal funding mechanisms to support that. But also, I think we talked about, if there's a mechanism that could allow for that, is that it's not just the research that's important, but really fostering the type of skills that we need going forward in terms of building relationships and trust and collaborations and partnerships that have to be really built into any kind of long-term research program.
Yeah, okay, great. Any other comments from the group, from group one? All right, well, let's move on to group two. And is that Alaska or Southeast?
That was Alaska.
Yeah.
Carolyn, Zav, did you want to start?
Yeah, sure, I'd be happy to. So yeah, our group had some good discussions. There's kind of two takeaways I wanted to share. One kind of was a tail end from the conversation we're having in the larger group, but it's regarding, cultural burning, and, not all Indigenous cultures engaged in a lot of it, especially some areas of Alaska. And so it's important that these discussions, involve the Indigenous groups, and they involve fire and ecosystem conditions, how things are changing, and how to manage fire. So there's kind of a broad way to talk about this beyond just cultural burning too. And then kind of moving on to some examples of success in collaboration and adaptive management. We saw that presentation on the Yukon Flats decision-making workshop, and to us that was, a really good example of different groups coming together and helping each other understand the ecosystem and fire regimes better, to kind of open up new paradigms for management, the start of many great conversations. And one of the things we talked about is, measuring success for something like this comes in case-by-case basis, and it's measured in many different ways. So it's good to have kind of evaluations for success on the onset, but it's kind of a long process, and it's difficult to fully measure. Does anyone else from the group want to add anything?
One thing that this is Ed. One thing that I would note, and we all know this, but it becomes really obvious when you start talking about the collaborative approach in Alaska, is scale is just different in Alaska than any other place within the United States. Now, it's probably much, and we know this, it's much more compatible with Canada, quite frankly, right across the border there. The scale of the issue, the scale at which they work, it's much more similar to Northern Canada. So, but that does influence the management approaches and how they go about thinking about planning for fire response, and also thinking about collaboration. And probably also, we didn't talk about this very much, but probably it also influences how people working in that area will think about conducting science, or the need for science. At what scale can we apply this, and how are we going to logistically go about doing this work? And we didn't talk about that, but I think that is one of the challenges that they've got some good examples. The Yukon Flats one is one that we talked about a bit, of where they have overcome this challenge. Lisa and Jeremy did do a really good job of drawing the distinction between, for instance, the Kenai Peninsula and interior Alaska in terms of management approach and some of the science challenges as well. And it is, and then also Garrett, excuse me, asked about Southeast Alaska as well. Such a big area, very distinct challenges relative to what part of the state you're talking about. So that's one of the unique things about the Alaska arena that needs to be taken into account when we start talking about dealing with the changing fire regime and climate change.
Thanks, Ed. Yeah, the issue of scale is so embedded in everything we do that it's so present sometimes it's easy to forget to even talk about it, but I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, that's really really fascinating. It's kind of mind-boggling. I remember being in Alaska on a field trip that Jeremy led, and my brain was exploding because it's just everything was so different from kind of what I had been trained and where I had seen and visited, and you know, even in terms of how much science is available to draw upon, that's completely different as well. So I really, that's kind of one of my take-home messages just from my couple of short visits to Alaska. Hope to get up there again soon, Jeremy. Yes, that's a hint. All right. Next group, let's see, that would be group 3. That must be Southeast. No?
Yes.
All right.
Looking for my co-lead, Kevin, the great keeper of notes.
He's eating. Is it lunchtime?
Yeah. No, we had a really great discussion and focus mainly actually around cultural burning in the Southeast and how that really the overlapping cultures and at times coexisting cultural practices that entailed with that, like African American, Afro Caribbean, tribal burning as well, and then Euro American, and different aspects of that. One thing we talked about is potentially how a lot of times there seems to be there is like distinct differences in, say, like objectives or values and certain cultural burning practices, and then say like what like a federal agency or a state agency is doing. In the Southeast, that's not always the case, and there's actually quite a bit of overlap in terms of goals and objectives with a lot of cultural burning practices and sort of what we're doing and why we're doing it with fire already, in terms of, say, speaking as a government person, a U.S. government person. So that came up, and we talked about that as a strength and how we can build on that, but then also like what is still out there in terms of building stronger relationships and learning from each other, and in terms of what's important, what do we value, and what knowledges do we have to that different folks with different perspectives and views and traditions can learn from each other. So what did I miss, Kevin and George?
We didn't say this, but one of the unspoken concerns, unappreciated concerns here in the Southeast on adaptation and strategies. So suppose we keep the culture of fire. Suppose we promote burning as a key adaptation tool. We're losing resources all the time to the Western United States, and it's not. It's if you read some of the legislation, it's designated west of the 30th. Meridian, whatever. And we really need to be thinking about, are we going to lose resilient communities at the expense of trying to save others? And that actually is an interesting prospect here in the East because of the just sort of the lack of appreciation of how critical fire is and sustaining those many objectives that Adam was talking about, that all seem to dovetail along with the frequent use of fire. I mean, every 1 to 3 years. Other than that, we just had a really good conversation about, the culture of fire here. And
yeah, in Dune. George, well, maybe George, I'll put George on the spot as the graduate student. We had a bit of a pedagogical discussion there at the end. How did you frame your question again in terms of, trying to limit loss, loss of knowledge and experience? Can you touch on that?
Yeah, so I'd mentioned how in the southeast, the rope of fire has never really been dropped. It was in Native American, African American, and then Herbert Stoddard and people burning for all sorts of reasons. But I had asked, and maybe more people can enlighten, if there was any sort of I guess any point in that time period, if there was practices that might have been lost. Is that what you're talking about, or the research question about how a lot of I can go at the Jones Center and say that we're ready to burn because our $30,000 weather station is saying that we have a field moisture content of 15 and it's 60 degrees outside and it's time to burn. But somebody that has been culturally burning their entire life could go out and tell me the exact same thing without any of the equipment, just because their burning is their culture and they understand that. Is that what you were?
Yeah, and then it just led into the discussion of, how do we try to limit those broken links, that can occur really quickly. And then we started talking about just honestly, we ended up talking about schools, like elementary schools and stuff like that as really key. That's sort of in our society now, how we're able to maintain a lot of that knowledge and appreciation for it. Go ahead, Kevin.
Almost fire literacy. And it gets back to some of the first panel discussion that we had yesterday, or second panel discussion we had yesterday with the managers, is how do they prepare for adaptation? They need less fire suppression mentality, more, ecosystem or holistic understanding of management mentality. And that is a part of the culture of fire in the Southeast that we are at risk of losing, is that full understanding of the why we use fire and how it accomplishes the variety of objectives on landscape. And again, it's a unique part of the country for that in that respect. So I do have better notes than what Adam and I just
rambled off. That'll wrap it for us. Thanks.
No, I think that's really great. And the fact that I think we, a lot of places just kind of suffer from this good fire, bad fire, for lack of a better word, dichotomy. And I just was, I'm on the email list of Kirsten Cinema, being in Arizona, not any longer currently, but I still get her emails. And she was touting the fact that, she had just, decided to support infrastructure and fire suppression. And I was like, wah, wah, wah. And again, dispelling this idea of good fire, bad fire. And I think there's been some really effective communications that have come out, I think, from Indigenous communities in particular. We brought up the Karuk Good Fire report. Ron Good just put out with some collaborators a short video on good fire. But it's like, how do we kind of reframe fire? Yes, can be really bad, but it also needs to be there. And how do we grapple with that? In our different contexts across the country and beyond. Let's see. So we're on to group 4. Does that mean that's California? Yeah. Which actually. I'll start us out, but really we had great conversation, and I think I'm tempted to turn it over to Karen, who did a really great job moderating this session. And we actually did go through the questions that had been framed for us. And I think that, we still, kind of what filtered through was the cultural burning previous discussion. But, we did, due to Karen's great facilitation skills, we were able to touch on a number of kind of aspects. And we sort of started with the idea of, these models for doing successful collaboration and kind of new approaches, which kind of brought us into the Uber project that Hugh had just presented on earlier, and kind of the trade-offs with this, private funding and the role of private funding and investment and expectations of investors for return on investment, but at the same time, as a mechanism for keeping projects going, getting them on the ground fast, furious. And then when government, in the meantime, in the background is doing its pendulum swing or waiting for a budget to pass, and then we're on CRs. The role of private investment, for example, can be very much kind of keeping things going. Any other ideas on that particular topic? A big theme was the scaling idea again, which, not unlike Alaska, but of course, we're talking about completely different scale. But I think in the context of California, we're really talking about the scale in terms of the millions of people that live here. The multiple objectives, the competing interests of California, that raises the level of complexity in which everything that happens in California, particularly related to fire, interacts with. So we also heard that Paul Stevelin is interested in coming in and doing some additional work with hopefully with some, leveraging some additional projects that folks in California are working on. And we talked about, well, how do you do that? How do you swoop in as a federal entity and affect change from local all the way up and still be able to report back to Congress in an effective way that oftentimes means bean counting? But then that sort of kind of segued into like, well, measures of success. How do we measure success? And, beans are convenient, but do they really get at what we're trying to do? And again, when you're talking about multiple groups of partners and stakeholders and what have you, different interests, who gets to choose, whose values win and whose values lose? And that was a really great point that Arana had brought up too, about losers and winners, and really trying to frame what success looks like, and then who's the judge of that. And there have been some interesting models proposed for doing that sort of work. I believe that was through the FRCC process, but at any rate, it still remains something that that we're all sort of really grappling with, particularly in different landscape types and different parts of the landscape. And that certainly resonates with what's happening in other parts of the country. In Alaska, what happens in Southeast Alaska or Southern California is different than what happens in the Sierra Nevada and the Kenai Peninsula, those kinds of things. So, similar themes there. And then getting back to kind of points of reference, how we best communicate with our publics. The use of maps can be really fabulous, but they can also be wrought with problems. And people go back to their one little pixel on the map, and that's all they're worried about. And so any other comments from our group kind of related to those things that I didn't capture?
One thing that you brought up, Carolyn, was the importance of the human element in determining success, and getting away, or getting away is the wrong word, making sure that there's an understanding that not all measures of success are purely ecological, for example, and that people have and that this is why we end up in these collaborative projects that end up being so damn cumbersome is because that's really what it comes down to, is people's needs and desires on landscapes and how to balance those all out. Anyway, something that you noted.
Great, thanks. All right, well, I think what we're kind of at a point too. Time check, Molly.
We've got about just under 15 minutes.
All right, great. I guess I would just ask for, over the next 5 minutes or so, some kind of thoughts from the group on kind of what we've heard, in the wrap up here, or just kind of in the report back rather, before we move into a wrap up. I think we're starting to see sort of these lots of differences, no one size fits all, but then there are some emergent themes that I think probably deserve more attention and may help us with the problem of scale at some point. Other sort of thoughts along those lines? Let's see, Sarah.
Yeah, hi. I just want to reiterate my comments from the talk that I gave earlier about evaluation, and Zav mentioned this, but I do think it ties into the conversation that we had earlier about engaging Indigenous tribes and tribal people. It's whenever you want to assess the effectiveness or evaluate whether it's a fuels management project or a workshop or various different activities, I do think it's important to consider that different partners or different participants could have different visions or concepts of what counts as success or what a metric of success should be. And so I think that's a really important element to put forward.
Yeah, that's really terrific, Sarah. Really important. Others? I see we gained Jens in this session, our last few minutes here.
Yeah, turns out I had the time wrong.
Oh no. It's time zone craziness.
I see you're recording it. I'll go back and watch it.
Yeah.
Offer some pearls of wisdom. Sorry about that. A lot going on.
No worries. But we are sort of comparing and contrasting, some of these ideas that have been brought up throughout our various sessions, and also kind of thinking about the issue of scale, and just give you a chance actually to have some parting thoughts as well.
Yeah, my thoughts are swimming in a sea of AFI all week, so they're not well organized right now.
No worries at all. Yeah, I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
It's all right.
All right. Others, kind of some, takeaways. Kevin, you just came on. You were eating back there.
I was finishing lunch, sorry.
All right.
No, it's really that this has been just a fantastic special session, and the conversations have been robust, substantive, fun, and really appreciate everybody's participation in it. I think that there's a lot of opportunity for follow-on products and continued conversations in other venues. So thanks to everybody for their contributions.
Yeah, clearly these kinds of conversations, there's no real great way to end them. And, I would put forth, we think about how we want to continue this at these other potential venues coming up. Of course, there is the fire and climate conferences put on by the International Association. What's the one in Pasadena and the one in Melbourne? It's the International
IAWF,
Association of Wildland Fire.
Thank you. I'm really getting all the acronyms at this hour of the week all messed up. Not being a good Fed. Yes, thank you, Arana, for putting that link. That really offers a nice opportunity. There's 2 different conferences there to really, again, continue the conversation at the nexus of fire and climate. At this point, I think I'll put it out there for any of the organizers to offer up some concluding thoughts. It's really been a pleasure working with the likes of Ed and JFSP folks, Molly, USGS at the broader level than the casks. That would be Kevin and Paul, and of course, Adam, and folks in the fire exchange networks, Barb, others. Any concluding thoughts, parting thoughts?
Well, Carolyn, this is Ed from JFSP, and I had a couple things I'd like to say. One's really important. One's more for put it in some context. For put it in context. As many of you who have participated yesterday and today can see, many of you are affiliated with JFSP in some way, and others are not. But clearly, there's been a strong JFSP presence with this session. And that's intentional because the JFSP governing board, and several of them participated, they've recognized, they and the program office have recognized for the last couple of years, this is a very big issue, and collectively we've kicked it around a bit. What's the best way to approach addressing the issue of working with partners to try and get a sense of climate change, the effects of changing climate on our fire regimes, so that we have a plan basically to tackle the most important science and proceed and provide the best information we can to the people who are tasked with this really sometimes it almost seems insurmountable challenge of managing fire-prone landscapes in this environment. And so we really were looking for a coming together of impactful and powerful minds to think about what are the gaps, what are the needs, what are the examples of some things that have been working. We have a motive here, and the motive is to help inform how we proceed in addressing this issue as a program. So from our standpoint, this workshop has been very, very valuable, and the contributions that all of you have made to that are significant. And I didn't want it to go by without you understanding how important this is to JFSP as an issue, to the governing board and to the program. And we don't view this as the end of the process by any means. It's really a key step in helping us formulate probably a longer term plan. So that's one thing. Thank you to all of you for participating from JFSP in particular. And second thing that I'll say, because it has to be said, this wouldn't have been successful without the leadership of Molly Hunter. And I think anybody on this group who put it together knows that Molly did a phenomenal job of conceptualizing and organizing a bunch of us and corralling people like Kevin Hires and myself who are always running different directions, and actually getting some good thoughts down on paper. So thanks, Molly, from everybody on the committee. You did a fantastic job putting this together. That's all I had to say, Carolyn.
All right, thank you so much, Ed. I wanted to echo your thanks to Molly. She is absolutely fantastic, hands down. I would like to steal her back to the Southwest Cask from you, but she's already made her intentions clear. Anyhow, I was going to pass it along to Jens. He has organized his thoughts, apparently. Go for it.
Yeah, it always takes at least 5 minutes. So two things I think that are coming down the pipe in terms of climate adaptation strategies. One is there is going to be a slug of money coming into fuels reduction in the next 5+ years, 5 to 10. A lot of that's going to be Western focused, and it's going to be happening in all different sorts of ways, all different pathways to channel that into action on the ground. Different agencies are going to be involved. It's going to be pure chaos, I think. But my hope is that we can get ahead of that a little bit in a way that we position ourselves as an interagency community to be able to learn from that work. It's not going to be implemented experimentally, but I think there's a real need for a cohesive monitoring strategy that allows us to look at these treatments that are going to go in. It's going to be a natural experiment. So there's going to be all different sorts of work that's going on. How are these different treatments? How are the different methods? How are the different intensities and sizes of these projects going to hold up in the face of continued wildfire and under hotter and drier conditions? There's a real learning opportunity there. And so that's one of the things I'm going to be spending a lot of energy trying to think about and get out ahead of. The second is on the post-fire front. This was a theme in the conference and some stuff I've been participating in. It was in my talk as well. But I think there are going to be increasing opportunities to think about managing post-fire landscapes in a way that builds or restores climate resilience. And just to highlight one potential example for how this might get plugged in is their region, and Hugh probably knows this, but Region 5 is undertaking a somewhat new process to deal with post-fire. They're calling them rapid assessments, but they're going to inform the longer term. It's not the Bayer work, it's everything that comes after the Bayer work. And so the large fires that happened last year, there are teams being stood up to think strategically about how to manage those burn landscapes going forward. And there's been a lot of work lately on climate adapted reforestation and continuing to work in low severity areas to either continue to restore or maintain resilience. And so I think there are conversations being had that can steer those actions into incorporating climate resilience. So two things that are percolating in my brain coming out of this conference that just wanted to raise for awareness. Anyway, thanks again, echoing the kudos to all the organizers. It's really enjoyable.
Terrific. Thanks, Jens. Others? Final departing thoughts. We've got about 4 minutes. In terms of opportunities to continue the dialogue, certainly the yes, Jonathan, yes, Jonathan, please, if you could share your idea for doing just that.
Well, I just wanted to share, I put in the chat that our agency has committed some funding to support a national workshop on Indigenous stewardship on public lands. And we plan to have sessions focusing on cultural burning, as well as maybe wildfire management, post-wildfire management as part of that. And so we'll be trying to stand up a steering group for that. But specifically from a geographic representation, if there's tribes from some of the regions, especially outside of the Pacific and the Southwest, where a lot of contacts already exist, I'd be interested in hearing from them. So I put my email in the chat if folks want to make suggestions or express interest.
Right, Paul. Thank you, Jonathan. That's terrific. Paul, you're up.
Yeah. Certainly the interaction of fire and climate is it's easy for all of us to see. And I think it's easy for a lot of the public to see. Fire does address and is at the forefront on a lot of issues. COVID is a good one. And I've watched over the last 2 years how the fire community has been at the forefront for dealing with the issues of COVID. I certainly think there is an opportunity for fire to be at the vanguard of how to address some of these things, but we have to be careful not to overplay it. I would also like to have a target in terms of what do we want to get out, what should we expect as the outcome out of all the investments of the infrastructure bill, the other treatments that Jen's talked about. We should be able to articulate what difference it will make and why. I'd also like to see a stronger presence of science supporting fire management or fire objectives in any kind of update if it does take place with a cohesive strategy. I do think there should be some aspect of it, a goal or something or what the position is of science in informing those goals. Certainly it was I think it was phase 2 development of the cohesive strategy, but I think a more tangible statement of its role in whatever the final strategy is, if there's an update, would be really important. That's it.
Great, thank you, Paul. So clearly there's a lot of opportunities. It's how we go about taking advantage of those. And my hope is, and I think the organizers hope, and you expressed this, and I know Molly has before too, is how we keep the dialogue going in such a way that it's coordinated, as collaborative as possible, We don't go back to our own organizations and agencies and just kind of think, in those particular silos, but we recognize this broader community. There's a lot of interest, there's a lot of expertise, and there's a lot of opportunity. So with that, I think, Molly, are you there?
Yeah, hopefully I'm not breaking up too much, but I can end by just saying, echoing the thanks for everyone for participating, and also thank you to Carolyn and Ed and Allison York, who's not here, Bob Wolfson, Kevin Hires, and Adam Trindle for also, working so hard on this, on putting this session together. And I'm just really pleased with all the participation that we got. So thank you, and stay tuned, I guess, for next steps.
Yeah, great. Enjoy your weekend, everyone. Happy holidays.
Bye. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye. Thanks.